Thank you. Thank you for coming out early on a Sunday morning. Thank you for everyone on live stream. And thank you, Stephen, for bringing me out all the way from Los Angeles. I consider myself a nutrition myth debunker. That's really my job title. And the reason for this, I love my job title, I'll tell you why. But the reason for this is that nutrition is so confusing. I would argue that nutrition is the most complicated of the sciences. For instance, chemistry. You've got some hydrogens, you've got some oxygens, put them together, you get some water. Very straightforward. You know, there's a lot of consensus among chemists. Or anatomy, you've got a lot of structures and functions, and it changes over time with the new technology and the new information that we gain. But overall, there's generally a nice consensus. Math, 2 + 2, always 4, no matter how you look at it. Nutrition has way more levels than that, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why it is so complicated. First of all, it's very difficult to study. So ideally, you would take thousands of people with all sorts of different ethnicities and gender and stick them in one little city when they were born. And you would monitor them for life, watch every single thing they eat, follow their biochemical parameters, follow their long-term health outcomes for decades, and we would gather a lot of information. But I'm not going to sign up for a study like that. Do you want to be watched every meal you eat? And who's going to fund that? So instead, we rely on all sorts of different types of data. We look at, for instance, a nutrient and what it does to the biochemistry in your body. We'll do like a randomized controlled trial, for instance, with 2 populations with similar levels of type 2 diabetes, and give them diet A compared to diet B, and watch their hemoglobin A1C and watch how their health parameters come about. We'll look at population studies, and we'll look at dietary patterns, look at the blue zones. We look at kind of all these different types of studies, and we put it all together into this giant database. And then we make conclusions based on the preponderance of evidence, which is where the second reason nutrition is so complex comes in: interpretation. If you go onto Dr. Google any time of day, you'll find 1,000 opinions on every subject within nutrition. We're going to talk about one of the hot topics now, saturated fat, but it just goes on and on and on. Everyone has an opinion on nutrition, particularly when you tell them you're on a plant-based diet, right? How many of you have heard that, where it's like, well, where do you get your fill-in-the-blank nutrient? We're going to talk about all that. There's so much. Everyone's an expert in nutrition when you tell them you're on a plant-based diet specifically. Add to that the billions and billions and bazillions of dollars that the food industry is vested in you eating their food. This starts all the way in preschool. I have little kids, and I remember preschool. I'll show you a picture. On the wall in the cafeteria, there's a big, strong athlete and a beautiful, famous singer, and the milk mustache on their milk, on their mouths. And it starts that conversation from day one. It plants seeds. All the way through medical school, nutrition school. My information was literally in small print at the bottom, sponsored by the Dairy Council. Very small print where you can't see it. I sat in on my husband's medical school nutrition class, and it was basically, you could see that information is just not there. All the way to right now, I can get free continuing education units if I go to something sponsored by the food industry. And continuing education units are expensive. So it goes all the way from childhood through education, all the way to the government. How many of you followed the 2015 dietary guidelines drama? Yes, it was amazing. This was the first time I really delved in with this because I was part of groups that were trying to sustain some of the information that came out. So every 5 years, the USDA and the HHS come up with new dietary guidelines. So before they do so, they enlist a very academic group, a scientific advisory committee filled with researchers, scientists, physicians, and they analyze all of the information that's come out in the last 5 years. What's the state of the nation? What could we do better? What do we need to do? And they come up with a report. And this report was 500+ pages. It was very in-depth. And then based on that, the USDA and HHS comes to their ultimate conclusions. Well, this was the first time that this report wanted to put in the guidelines that meat is unsustainable. They would not have that. And if you saw the uproar from the meat industry to prevent that statement from ever being put into action so that we can see this, because, by the way, the dietary guidelines are what governs what foods are offered at WIC, what foods are offered for the USDA school lunch and breakfast programs. It dictates what we see as nutrition advice, the overarching nutrition advice. Well, it didn't make it into the guidelines, needless to say. And unfortunately, this happens all the time. Money and power is very, very, very prominent in terms of what we hear in terms of nutrition. So that's just basic nutrition. That's just nutrition. Take it to the next level. Add to that the information that we're gathering about the imminent depletion of global resources, water, land. I live in California, as I mentioned last night, and I've been there my entire life, and I've witnessed the effects of this drought. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's very scary. We haven't seen real rain, even though they predicted El Nino last year. So there are massive changes and massive depletion coming from the livestock industry and producing animals for food. Similarly, there is so much evidence showing that the #1 cause of climate change is livestock production, more so than all transportation combined. And this is based on the World Health Organization's assessment several years ago, I think 2006. Add to that this antibiotic superbug phenomenon we have. So the CDC estimates that about 2 million people were sickened every year and 23,000 die every year. This was in 2013. There was an article that came out, I don't know if you saw it last week, about, and I think it was New York Times, about how we're not even reporting all of these superbug infections. Essentially, we're using so many antibiotics that these bacteria have evolved and surpassed, and they are able to survive it. And people are sickened and dying from this. Well, guess what? 70 to 80% of all antibiotics used in the United States goes to healthy animals on factory farms to prevent them from spreading disease and to save money. Add to that, the horrible, worst icing on the cake, if proverbial, if you would say, is the fact that 124,000 land animals are brutally slaughtered every single day around the world to end up on the plate. So you add all of this information together, and food is no longer just, what am I in the mood to eat? And it's more so than, is this good for me or not good for me? There are global epidemic issues, and it is everything is at stake right now, and it is really important. So because of this, nutrition gets exponentially more complicated. I want to tell you a little story about my journey. When I was a teenager, I read John Robbins' Diet for a New America. And how many of you read that book? When I read that book, I was shattered. I'm sure some of you were as well, because I had no idea how food ended up on my plate. And it was devastating and shocking. And what do you do with that information? Well, I didn't know any vegetarians at the time. My mom was the house chef, and I wasn't familiar in the kitchen yet. So I didn't know what to eat. I didn't know, there was no internet. I'm dating myself. There was no social media yet. I couldn't go on Facebook and ask my friends, well, what should I eat? And it was hard to maintain and get some information, good information. So I did my best. I would eat granola bars and fruit rolls, again, dating myself. And of course, my parents were worried about me. They're good parents, and they saw that, what is she eating? She's eating side dishes, and how is she going to be okay? So they enlisted their friend that they knew in the healthcare industry, Candy. We're still friends today. And the story actually gets funny with her, but she is a nurse. And she was taught as a nurse to teach what we're taught in graduate school, even for nutrition, about you're going to be protein deficient, you're going to be iron deficient. And they staged what I like to refer to as my intervention, because they took me to a steakhouse and proceeded to order me a teriyaki steak with a pineapple ring on top, and told me how deficient I was going to be in all of these nutrients. Well, I got scared. It's scary. I was young. I wanted to be healthy and strong and have a life I wanted to live and be healthy, as many of us do, most of us do. But I'll never forget that first bite of steak. And as I wrote about this in Vegetarian Diet, as I put my fork in that steak, you can't unknow what you know. And that first bite, I knew too much, and I knew all I saw was a face, and I saw what was happening, and it just killed me. But how many of you are familiar with Dr. Melanie Joy's work? She wrote Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and We're Cows. We're Cows, and she has this amazing TED Talk. Highly recommended work. She coined the term carnism, and the idea that eating meat is normal, natural, and necessary. And so that's, I got acculturated back. I was able to go back to eating regular, standard American, healthy diet. And I kept reading because I knew in my heart of hearts that how could something be so horrible to the planet that we live on? How could something cause immense suffering in thousands and billions of animals and be good for me. Like, it didn't make sense, it didn't resonate with me. So I kept reading and reading, knowing that there has to be something bigger than this. And it took, flash forward to many years of a degree in nutrition and finally realizing that, wait a second, not only can I get my protein from plants, but it's packaged better. And not only can I get iron from plants, but you get a better source, a safer source of iron from plant foods. So ultimately, I was very happy to see the symbiotic trifecta take place. That what is good for the planet, what is good to prevent cruelty is also good for me. Not only can we survive on a plant-based diet, but the research is increasingly showing that we can indeed thrive on a plant-based diet. So I think we could sit here all day if we wanted to. So just to say, I love my job as a myth debunker. I wish I had a myth debunker that I knew when I was a kid and wanted to do this. I love that I work with people now that come to me, their kids see this information and want their family to go plant-based, and I get to help them now, and the parents that want to make their families plant-based. So it's such an honor for me to have this, to talk about this information. So like I said, we could talk all day about all of the myths that surround nutrition and plant-based nutrition specifically. But since we're limited in time, I selected my favorite topics. One is, of course, the very pervasive one that plant-based diets are suboptimal nutritionally. We're going to tackle saturated fat, and butter is back. This is one of my biggest pet peeves, that protein is a food group, carbs is a food group, fat is a food group, or they're not. We're going to talk about that. And then the idea that our bones are going to dissolve without dairy. A lot of us feel that way. We are taught to think that way. And we'll end on a fun, delicious note that plant-based diets are restrictive. That they're not. That's the myth. Okay, myth one. But where do you get your fill in the nutrient? So, what nutrients are you always hearing about that people are concerned about? Protein. Number one, protein. Iron, calcium. Now they're omega-3s. So we're going to talk about all of that. I love this cartoon because I share this cartoon a lot because basically people are eating the standard American diet, sitting there at McDonald's eating a burger and fries and maybe a Diet Coke, like many of us used to do, and thinking, oh my gosh, that vegan, where is she getting her nutrients? And there's this really misperception of the idea that if you're on a vegan diet, you need to plan more carefully than if you were not on a vegan diet. Every diet needs to be well thought out if you're going to, get all of your nutrients. But I'm here to say, with great confidence, after all of these 20 plus years in this industry, you can get all of your nutrients from plants. Save for vitamin B12, but we will go into detail about that. But it is very possible, and that's only because of society, and we talked about that last night. But if you eat a wide variety of vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices, you will get everything you need in wonderful proportion and in wonderful packaging. So that Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, who is not only sponsored by the Dairy Council, and if you go to one of their meetings, which I've only gone once and I can't go again, you have booths from every food industry, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, everyone trying to just gather the troops and tell you how, you can make this healthy. I remember McDonald's trying to recruit me when I was walking through that thing. I was like, are you kidding me? Well, I don't know. Can I change everything about your menu? But that Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, which has these sponsors, has in their position paper, this is from 2009, the updated one is coming soon, but they state that an appropriately planned vegetarian diet, including total vegetarian or vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. Well-planned vegetarian diets are appropriate for individuals during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, and for athletes, one of my favorite populations. I love the athletic population because working with illness is really important, and you see people getting better. But taking someone at optimal health and seeing how you could push them past that even to superior health after that with a plant-based diet is very exciting. It's all exciting, in my opinion. But there are studies to show that vegetarian diets can be nutritionally adequate. This study looked at they compared a meat-eating diet to a vegetarian diet, and they showed that the vegetarian diets actually had higher intakes of the crucial nutrients fiber, vitamins A, C, E, thiamine, riboflavin, folate, calcium, iron, potassium than non-vegetarians. Well, guess what? In the Dietary Guidelines Scientific Advisory Committee report, Those were some of the key nutrients that the standard American diet was lacking, and the standard American population were lacking in these nutrients, but we can get those from plants. They also showed on the flip side of that you're not taking in stuff like saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, and other things that we know are consistent with disease promotion. They even stated that even with weight loss, so when you're cutting calories, every calorie matters more for nutritional density, and even with fewer calories or calorie restriction, it's still nutritionally optimal. And by the way, the little thing about weight loss is the secret to weight loss is a plant-based diet, because you could eat more food. I love food. I love to eat more food for fewer calories and all nutrient dense. So this study looked at those protective factors versus the pathogenic factors. And when you're eating plants, of course, you're getting this plethora, this beautiful natural plethora of phytochemicals like antioxidants that have amazing properties we'll talk about in a minute, and fiber, and you're not getting the pathogenic factors. And there's a lot of them. This study compared 5 diets, so going up in animal product intake from vegan, no animals, vegetarian, eggs and dairy, semi-vegetarian, I don't know how they always calculate it a certain way, but it varies depending on the study. A fish with the vegetarian, so fish and dairy and eggs, and omnivorous diet. And they looked at 2 healthy eating scores. One is called Healthy Eating Index 2010, and the other one is a Mediterranean diet score. So it's a scoring system of how healthy the diet is. Well, they found that the vegan diet is the healthiest. I like to look at it as a spectrum, because a lot of people come to me and say, I don't want to go vegan, will you work with me? And at first I was like, sure, I'll work with anyone, I want to help everyone. But then I started to realize that, because the more plants you eat, the better you get, the more plants you want to eat and the less of the health damaging foods you want to eat. And that's where the result, it's like a dose dependent relationship. By the way, I have these graphics on my website, which is currently being updated. So it's kind of, the pictures are in and out, but I'm happy to send you any of my graphics, my pyramid, my plate. I think I've created them as tools that I want everyone to use, because they've been helpful for me and my clients. This is my favorite way to look at nutrients. Now, this comes from Dr. T. Colin Campbell's A China Study, and he gratefully gave me permission to reprint this in the vegetarian diet, and I just didn't want to reinvent the wheel because this was so brilliantly executed. He took 500 calories of plant foods, of a nice variety of plant foods. Actually, I'll tell you, they were tomatoes, spinach, lima beans, peas, and potatoes, and he compared that equal mixture to an equal mixture of 500 calories worth of beef, pork, chicken, and milk. And he stuck those in the nutrient processor, the calculator, and here's what it came out with. And it says it all, in my opinion, nutritionally speaking. 0 cholesterol in plants. You only get cholesterol from animal products. You get 9 times the amount of fat in animals as compared to plants. But here's the kicker. Almost identical amounts of protein, 33 versus 34. So if everyone's so concerned about protein, all they need to do is look at this. Of course, then they'll be like, well, that's 1 gram of protein, but that's ridiculous. Fiber, there's only fiber in plants, 31 grams as opposed to 0. And then you've got twice the amount of iron, and it's non-heme iron in plants, which is optimal because it's not oxidative like heme iron is, and twice the amount of calcium. So you can get everything better in plants. Here's another graphic I created as a handy guide. I have magnets of these, where it's just notable nutrient sources. So when people say, where do you get your protein? Where do you get your omega-3 fats? And here's just kind of a chart with all that information. It's on my website, plantbaseddietitian.com. But I have to save room for B12. B12 is somewhat controversial, but really the preponderance of data show that vegans that do not supplement tend to have a higher incidence of vitamin B12 deficiency. The problem with this is it doesn't show up in your lab work until possibly it's too late, and you could end up with irreversible neurological damage if you're not supplementing B12. Now, the argument about this is, oh, well, then it's not natural. A vegan diet can't be natural if you need to supplement. So my answer to that is it is natural. It is found in the microorganisms in the soil, and unless you don't sterilize your food like most of us do, I don't like eating gritty, what we were talking about last night, carrots. I don't like soil in my food. So we sterilize it. We clean everything very well. My garden doesn't grow because we have a big drought in California. Some people have figured out. I haven't. So it is natural. But the animals consume it. That's how it ends up in animals. And we're seeing B12 deficiency in all sorts of populations. As we age, We decrease our production of intrinsic factor, which helps the absorption of B12. And so a lot of people, as we age, are less able to absorb B12. People with gastrointestinal issues. It is not an exclusively vegan issue, but it is necessary. And I go with Jack Norris. He stratified everything based on this certain calculation, and I follow him and Dr. Michael Greger's recommendations of 2,500 micrograms a week from cyanocobalamin, and that you could do it any way you want because it's a safe, easy, effective, it's water soluble, it goes in, what you don't need goes out. So you could do 1,000 micrograms 3 times a week or 2 to 3 times a week. You could do a 500 microgram every day, but they're very easily absorbed and very easily utilized, and it's like an insurance policy, very cheap, and I highly recommend it if you're vegan or when you're vegan. Okay, how many of you have seen these headlines? Oh my goodness, butter is back. We could eat cheese, we could have bacon, and people went to town on this. And it's crazy because it's been decades, and that's literally what this book is all about. I went back to the Mediterranean diet and before, and where does this whole diet, heart health hypothesis come from? We found out that saturated fat raises serum cholesterol levels, raises your risk for cardiovascular disease. And it's been pretty much understood and accepted for decades and decades. So what happened all of a sudden? These 2 recent meta-analyses happened. One was by Siri Torino et al. In 2010, and then another one by Chowdhury et al. In 2014. And they had different studies that they looked at, but they concluded that saturated fat is not correlated with heart disease, despite the fact that we've all known this for decades and decades. So it's interesting because you have to be kind of a statistician, because if you just read the conclusion, it's like, oh, okay, I can have my butter and cheese. And when you look at it, you have to look at it really carefully. But of course, the health experts looked at it very carefully and went berserk. Like, this is crazy. There were, I think, 12 complaints about the selection, the biased selection of the articles. Here's some of those. There were all these different flaws with the articles. I just took a screenshot of the letters by people like Walter Willett, head of Harvard Nutrition, and people just saying, you have to take this down. But the damage was done because the media picked this up. So there were other reasons, like the fact that they compared, many of these studies compared people on a standard American diet that already have high saturated fat intakes to people on a standard American diet that had slightly higher saturated fat intakes, and that's not going to show any kind of statistical significance. Other things where a lot of the studies used 24-hour diet recall. And do you remember what you had for breakfast yesterday? Quick, right? It's like the least reliable source of a diet study. It's not a good way it's not a reliable methodology. So there were a lot of reasons with this, why they were not well done, well executed studies. And if you could look at them, but you could also look past them. Cochrane reviews are like the creme de la creme of review articles, and they really are rigorous in what they expect in terms of their review. And in 2012, the Cochrane review stated that replacing saturated fat with other fats, so here's the kicker too, it's not carbs. Refined carbs, and that was what else happened in these 2 meta-analyses. If you compare saturated fat to processed refined sugary carbs, you're not going to have a benefit. So it's what you're comparing it to. If you compare saturated fat to trans fats, then saturated fat may look better. But if you compare saturated fat to whole grain or complex carbohydrates, then of course it causes heart disease. And that's what this concluded. That's what the American Heart Association and American College of Cardiology concluded in 2014 when they got together and reassessed that the fact that saturated fat is known to increase your LDL, your L-lousy cholesterol, your bad cholesterol. It also lowers your good cholesterol, your HDL. And essentially, it still increases your risk of cardiovascular disease in solidarity with all of these decades of information that we have. They recommended that we limit our saturated fat intake to no more than 5 to 6% of total calories. That's really low. And the average American, well, I'll talk about that in a second. This study in 2015 by American College of Cardiology stated replacing, so it depends on what you replace it with. That's why it gets really complicated. If you replace it with polyunsaturated fats, you have a 25% lower risk of coronary disease. If you replace it with monounsaturated fat like avocado, olives, you'll get a 15% reduction. And if you replace it with whole grains, you get a 9% reduction. But either way, if you're replacing it, and they ideally say to replace it with polyunsaturated fats, you're going to have a risk reduction. Just recently, a study in 2016 in the Journal of American Medical Association's Internal Medicine concluded that they supported those current dietary guidelines to replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated. Now, this to me is the best argument against nutritionism. Have you guys heard about what, I mean, the idea of nutritionism is looking at one nutrient and making decisions. This is a flaw inherent in nutrition data and studying nutrition, because we have to kind of look at things like this. But it does show that it does show that there are issues. Did you guys see what happened with the sugar industry this week? Because that's a perfect example. So this week, it came out that in 1967, the sugar industry paid Harvard's, like 3 researchers at Harvard, a lot of money to put the emphasis on dietary fat and exonerate sugar as a cause of cardiovascular disease. And they were very effective in doing so, hence the low-fat movement, where everything, you know, guys were eating those SnackWell cookies, those fat-free cookies, and I was doing that in college. I remember thinking, oh, low-fat, I could eat as much as I want of these sugary processed foods. So they found this out, and it's not surprising. But the interesting thing about this is that they're both not so good, but they're nutrients, right? If you're focusing on whole foods and eating the types of foods that we're talking about eating, none of this really matters, because both refined sugar and both saturated fat are health damaging. We know that. So it's really about looking at the whole food, the sources of food, and not focusing on one nutrient. And literally, I was packing to walk out the door, and this popped up in my email, and it was another study about the saturated fat and coronary heart disease. The debate goes on, and they actually, I had to say this because I had already written my talk. It'd been done for a week, and they actually said in this study, I have to say it because I was like, oh my gosh, that's what I said. The study of diet to disease relationships is one of the most challenging of modern day science. So it's been corroborated, it's not just me. But I mean, if you look at food instead, you'll see articles like this, that showed, it was the NIH study, and they looked at over 500,000 people, and for 10 years. And they concluded that red and processed meat is associated with an increased risk of total mortality, cancer, and cardiovascular disease. If you look at this study, meat independently as a risk factor, 8,000 people, non-vegetarians, were 74% more likely to develop type 2 diabetes over 17 years than vegetarians. So if you look at the food groups, it all comes together. That's why you have to look at everything. You can't look at 2 studies out of hundreds of studies. And you have to really look at it with a big picture. That's the lesson. So how many of you know Brenda Davis and Visanta Molina? Yes, Brenda is my role model, my mentor, my hero, and my dear friend. And her new book, I highly recommend, Becoming Vegan, the Comprehensive Edition. It's a Bible. It's that big. It is, and every detail is brilliantly referenced. And anyway, she's amazing. So in that book, they talk about the vegan heart advantage. And here it is. So if the American Heart Association is saying no more than 5 to 6% of calories coming from saturated fat, well, guess what? Vegans get about 6.9% of their calories from saturated fat on average. That's already above that. That's how low it is. Oh, so I didn't say this. So for all of you that may not know, saturated fat is primarily found in animal products. The #1 source in the American diet is dairy, especially cheese. But it's also found in small amounts in nuts and seeds and other plant foods. It's found in higher doses in the tropical oils like coconut oil, which we'll talk about in a second, palm oil and palm kernel oil. So really, if you add 1 serving of meat to this diet, the 6.9% is going to go up. And if you add 1 serving of dairy, look at the lacto-ovo-vegetarians have about 10.6% of their calories coming from saturated fat, which is double the recommended intake. And then the non-vegetarians, when you're including meat, is more than double, or about double, the recommended maximum from the American Heart Association recommendations. So this doesn't leave room for animal products. It simply does not leave room. So I don't know, I wish we could say instead of limit saturated fat that they would say limit meat, and that would change everything. And we'll talk about that next. The other advantage of a vegan diet is average total serum, our body cholesterol. Our average for vegans, 150, which if you follow the Framingham study and Dr. William Castelli, he basically stated that you will basically become heart attack proof if you have a cholesterol level under 150. Now this is, arguable, but it does, a lower serum cholesterol is ideal. And then lacto-vegetarians have a 187 as an average, and non-vegetarians go up to 193. But they don't really start statins until about 260 for some reason. Hence why heart disease is still the #1 killer around the world. The other advantage of a vegan diet for heart health and everything health is fiber intake. We get, I think it's, when I was looking at that dietary committee 500-page report, it was something like 2% of the population, 1% of the population gets the recommended fiber intake. It's so low, don't quote me on the number, but it's so low that almost nobody is getting enough fiber. Where do you get fiber? To me, I think fiber, I think plants, because you could only get it from plants. And vegans have about twice the amount of fiber intake as non-vegetarians on average. So word on coconut oil. Okay, I love coconut oil. I put it in my hair. It makes it shiny. I go exercise and then I wash it out and my hair is all soft. I love it on my skin. My skin just eats it up. My dog licks my hands when I put it on. But I don't recommend consuming it. Sorry for all the coconut oil lovers. But you know, the whole idea is it's high in saturated fat. But, oh wait, but it's medium chain triglycerides. Well, finally we have an answer. Finally, this year, there was a study, a review study that came out looking at coconut oil, and they concluded that basically coconut oil is not much better than butter. It really does act like regular other kinds of fatty acid chains of saturated fat in the body. So if you look at the 5 to 6%, that's going to push you right over. Okay, this is my pet peeve, one of my favorite topics, because this is what throws everything off, as I mentioned. Protein is not a food group. Carbs, not a food group. Fat, not a food group. And when you say things like, this looks like this, carbs are bad, I'm avoiding carbs, or all carbs are the same, like comparing sugar to broccoli, or I need more protein, or this is my favorite when I go to a restaurant and order the salad or something, would you like a protein with that? Fat is good, fat is bad. Or what's the perfect ratio of protein to carbs to fat? This is where this happens, where people just, they associate protein with meat or sugar with carbs, and it gets very confusing. And I think that's a source, that's a main source of confusion for the public and how media pick it up. Food consists of, in a broad speaking sense, macronutrients, which are energy providing nutrients, 3 macronutrients, fat, protein, and carbohydrates. You could also get your energy from alcohol, but that's not essential, sorry. And then there's micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. They don't provide energy, but they provide essential functional units that we require for optimal health and functioning. But every whole intact food contains some ratio of protein, carbs to fat, depending on the type of food. Except oil, 100% pure fat, no carbohydrates, no protein. Sugar on the carbohydrate side, pure carbohydrates, no fat, no protein. Meat, mostly protein and fat, no carbohydrate, which means no fiber. Cheese, mostly fat, some protein, no carbohydrates. On the flip side of that, look at what beautiful Mother Nature has created. Legumes, mostly carbs, some protein, low in fat. They're all very similar, but they're all in the really healthy ratios. So let's break it down a little. So this is my meme that I posted this week on social media, because I'm always saying it. Carbs are not a food group. So carbohydrates break down. One of the things it breaks down into, first of all, simple sugar, what we need for energy, and it breaks down into fiber, one of the 2 most health-promoting food groups of all. And let's talk about that. Why is fiber so fabulous? And I can go on, and I have there's a great research article summarizing it, and research articles don't tend to be this thick, but it's that thick because there's so much evidence on fiber and its relationship to disease. You have a quicker transit time through the system when you increase your fiber, which means less exposure to toxins, right? The sooner it's out, the better. Except for you want to, of course, absorb the nutrients before it goes out, but it does regulate all of that. It removes heavy metals such as mercury from your bloodstream and takes it out. Same with excess sex hormones, which are correlated with increased risk for prostate cancer, breast cancer, sex hormone-related cancers. It slows or moderates, it tempers the regulation and the absorption of glucose. So it goes into your bloodstream at a more controlled rate, which is very important for insulin regulation and all of that. And it also controls the rate of digestion. So it goes slower down through the track, or at the right pace. It fills you up. It adds to satiety, makes you feel full, which of course promotes weight loss. Fiber is time and time again shown to reduce your risk of colorectal cancer. So there's a lot. This is just a snapshot of all of the miracles associated with fiber. And again, this is only found in plants. Phytochemicals as well. There are probably thousands of different phytochemicals that we're just starting to recognize and title and find all of the myriad health benefits associated with each one, all the way from having an antioxidant effect to having bone strengthening effects. It goes on and on. Basically, the plants have their built-in protection of, their colors or their smells or their flavors. Those are for them to protect themselves, but it's a beautiful symbiotic relationship, as it should be, and that also has the same beneficial effects in us, in our bodies. So some fun facts about carbs. That's how I cut carbs, with a pizza cutter. Glucose is the only source of fuel for the brain. The brain requires glucose. Have any of you in your past, I don't know if you want to admit this, I tried the low-carb diet many years ago. I was an actress and a dancer in Los Angeles. So needless to say, people were always attacking me about, you have to lose weight, you lose weight. So I was on every diet for years, and that's why I got very fascinated with nutrition. That was my nutrition story, not my plant-based story. And I tried the low-carb diet. And me and my mom and my sister did it at the same time. And I will never forget, me and my sister were laying on the couch, couldn't do anything, and we're like, you go get the peanut butter. No, you go get the peanut butter, because we had no energy. And you can't think, because your brain needs it, and your body needs carbohydrates to function. So I personally know how horrific that diet is. Carbohydrates are the most efficient source of fuel. Our body loves carbohydrates. You bring it in, it goes to work. Right before a workout, you want to have a high-carb meal. You want to have a banana or a piece of fruit or dried fruit, whatever. It goes right into your bloodstream, immediate source of energy, and it's very hard to store carbohydrates. It requires a lot of energy. I think it's a third of the calories to go into de novo lipogenesis, where you're turning it into fat. Basically, the body takes fat and turns it into fat very easy, but carbohydrates, they want to get out. It is metabolically very, very efficient. So it's a wonderful, wonderful source of food. And the most nutrient-dense foods are carbohydrate-rich. As I showed you, the vegetables, the fruits, the whole grains, the legumes, all the foods that we know decrease your risk for disease. Protein, we bring in protein and it goes into our body and we break it down into peptides and amino acids. There's about 9 essential amino acids, meaning we need them from our diet, and then the rest we can make from those. But there are so many myths. I think that is the most confusing of all for people, is protein. And, well, okay. So the first myth of protein is that we're not getting enough. Well, we really only need about maybe 10% of our calories from protein. Other than that becomes extra. And extra, just because something is good doesn't mean that more is better. It's very taxing on the kidneys. It's very taxing on the body to have to go through and metabolize this. My husband is a kidney expert. He's a pathologist, and he sees kidney disease, and he's gotten so busy they had to hire someone else. People are responding to this need for protein in a very health-damaging way. There's a disease, I think the strive for more protein in lieu of getting fiber is really what's getting us into trouble. We can absolutely get all the protein we need by consuming adequate calories. This goes for athletes, this goes for big, strong athletes, this goes for everyone. If you're eating enough calories to fuel yourself, you're gonna get enough protein. We can get all of our essential amino acids from plants. People think, oh no, you have to get them in the right order, you have to get the perfect protein. Well, I'll never forget, many years ago I saw Dr. T. Colin Campbell speak, and he said, and this just, you'll see why I can never forget this, he said, well, if you want the perfect protein that has all the perfect amino acids to match our human profile, what we need, eat human flesh. It's exactly what you need. Oh, no thank you. But we don't. Our body's so much wiser than this. So we break down those amino acids, we pull them in our body, and when we need to make a fingernail or an eyelash or an organ tissue or whatever, it puts it back together. We are much wiser. We can't outsmart what our body can do. So if you're getting all these essential amino acids packaged better, then you are doing well. So we really only need, I said 10, maybe 15% of calories, but that might be high. Another way to look at it, and the way the Institute of Medicine recommends it, is an average adult needs 0.8 grams per kilogram per day. So that changes the percentage and it changes all of that, but you can calculate it. And about the maximum protein, so we looked to the American College of Sports Medicine for protein guidelines for athletes, and about the max for endurance athletes is about 1.2 to 1.4 grams per kilogram per day, and for strength athletes about 1.6 to 1.7 grams per kilogram per day. But if you're eating enough calories to fuel what you're doing exercise-wise, you're going to increase your calories, grams of protein per calorie per day. And what is it, like Michael Phelps, I remember hearing, not this Olympics, but the last one, that he eats like 17,000 calories a day or 13,000, some crazy amount of calories a day because you're burning through all those calories. So you're eating more, and just naturally you're going to get protein, but in the right capacity. And the benefit, of course, is the perfect packaging that comes along with plant protein. So instead of getting animal protein that also contains saturated fat, dietary cholesterol, heme, iron, new 5-GC, L-carnitine that converts to a TMAO, heterocyclic amines, advanced glycation end products, all those things that come packaged with that protein, and no fiber and no phytochemicals, you're getting it packaged with all the good stuff and none of the bad stuff. Okay, fats. Usually they come in a triacylglycerol. They're divided up into a glycerol backbone and free fatty acids. But let's talk about the myths surrounding fats. So there's a few. Low fat versus a moderate fat diet. And this is interesting. There is a lot of good evidence. Look at Dr. Dean Ornish, Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn, reversed advanced coronary disease. Never been done before that we knew of. They reversed it on a very low fat plant-based diet, 10% of calories. That's very low fat. Dr. Neil Barnard, he moderated glucose levels to the extent that medications would do with a low-fat plant-based diet. Okinawa has a very low-fat plant-based diet, about 10 to 15% of calories coming from fat. On the flip side of that is the Mediterranean diet, upwards of 36% of calories coming from fat. Raw food diets tend to be higher in fat because of the reliance on nuts and seeds for some of the protein. So people do well in all of these different camps. So that's why if you look at, there's like an acceptable macronutrient distribution range in the regulations. We don't really have an upper limit. We don't really have a recommended guideline, but they say, oh, anywhere from 20 to 35% of calories. So it's really controversial. I don't have an answer for you because there isn't an answer. It's really the quality of food versus the distribution of fat. And I don't even recommend, I'm like the anti-counting dietitian. I don't recommend people start calculating their calories and their protein, their fat, but it's just interesting to look at the different populations. The other issue about fats is fats versus oils. And we discussed this last night. The no oil campaign. I spent a long time debunking or looking at the evidence on olive oil in the Mediterranean diet because I've been recommending a limited or no oil diet for a long time. And the reason for that, for me and my clients, is because 2/3 of the global population is overweight or obese, 1/3 is in the world, 1/3 of the global and 2/3 of the United States are overweight or obese. People come to me, they want to lose weight. And because oil is such a concentrated source of calories, 1 cup is 2,000 calories, which is more than a day's worth of calories for many people. And how easy is it to gluck, 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 half a cup of oil on your salad and then saute your vegetables at night for dinner? It's very easy to add up, and those hundreds and thousands of calories you could save a week. It's an easy solution. If you're eating at home, it's so easy to cook and bake and do everything, make dressings without oil, and it saves so many people. It really is the people that come to me and they just can't lose those extra 10 pounds or they're just struggling with it. This is really an effective tool. But there's other reasons for limiting oils as well. But I also want to distinguish between fats and oils because people say, well, isn't there oil in nuts? No, because nuts is an intact food. Oil is the processed food. It's where the oil is extracted and all the fat is extracted from the nut or the olive or whatever and is turned into a concentrated source of fat, and it adds up quickly. The other issue about fats is the omega-3 thing. So it gets really complicated, so I'm going to try to keep it as simple biochemically as possible, just to save time. As plant sources of omega-3 fats are ALA, alpha-linolenic acid. It's one of the 2 essential fats besides omega-6 fats, which you could find in abundance everywhere. And ALA in our body is elongated into EPA and then is elongated again into DHA. And there's all these different in-between stages. But we need all 3 forms of those fatty acids they do different things in the body. So we don't have long-term data on vegans to show whether or not we need to have those longer chain forms, because what we know is that long-term vegans tend to have lower levels. Actually, anyone who's not eating fish tends to have lower levels of the longer chain versions. Does that mean it's a problem? We don't know, because vegans tend to have a decreased risk for cardiovascular disease, and it's increasing evidence of decreased risk for Alzheimer's, all that stuff that we see associated with omega-3 fatty acids. So do we need it? We don't know. So I go to Brenda Davis for advice because I have dubbed her the queen of fatty acids because she knows every single study on fatty acids and what she's recommending, so therefore I am recommending too, to either double your ALA requirement and or to consider supplementing with a microalgae formula, which is exactly what the fish eat to get it concentrated. They do the work for you. I call it the middle fish. They are eating the microalgae, it's converting in their body, and then they put it together and you get it in their flesh. But you don't have to, and you don't have to continue damaging the oceans and, and get all the intake of dioxins and PCBs and mercury and all that stuff. And like I said last night, if you know people that are still sticking to the fish because of this issue, ask them to go get a mercury test, and you'll see that people that eat fish, not even every day, will have mercury levels, and that's a heavy metal, and God knows what else is in there, because we know what's in our oceans, or we know some of what's in our oceans. So really, it's all about whole plant foods, and that's where you get the ideal macronutrient ratio without calculations. I try to make it simple. I'm always trying to explain this processing thing, because technically, you could cut a carrot and call it processed. So it depends on your definition. We don't have a solid definition on what processed means. So essentially, this looks at, for instance, you could take grapes and then you take out the water and you've got raisins, and you take out the fiber and you have juice. Or you take a wheat berry and you take out some of the fiber and you end up with whole grain bread. And you take out more of the fiber and you end up with white flour. So it's all, all of it is processing. And ultimately you want to eat the most intact foods as possible, as most intact and most often as possible, and emphasize those for optimal health, because you get everything that's packaged together. But there are some exceptions, like the phytochemicals in tomato sauce. When you cook tomatoes and make a marinara sauce or sofrito, which I talk a lot about, that was a staple in the Mediterranean diet, in the traditional Mediterranean diet, the phytochemicals get concentrated in there. So there are some exceptions. Hemp oil, not that I recommend oil, hemp oil has a concentrated source of the omega-3s because, you're concentrating it. So different things happen to different foods, but overall you want to eat them as intact as possible. Why is this important? This is a slide from a Dr. Greger lecture from a couple years ago, and he shows very effectively that diet is the #1 cause of death and disability in the United States. And if you look at what we're eating as food, look at what we're eating. 2/3 of our intake comes from processed foods. 2/3. This is scary. It's scary as a mom, too. 1/4 of our foods are coming from animal products. And then a minimal 12% is coming from plant foods, half of which is like an almond and an almond joy, a blueberry and a blueberry pie, not even really intact whole foods. If you look at this, this should be absolutely reversed if we want to do something about our disease and our healthcare crisis that is imminent right now. They think there's food in our food. We really need to go back to eating real food. And that's what this all boils down to. It's whole foods. Don't worry about the nutrients. Don't worry about the ratios. Don't worry about the calories. Just simply eat plants. Keep it simple. Okay, let's talk about our bones dissolving without dairy, which is a big concern for many people. This was that picture, well, I added the text, but this is what I saw in my kids' elementary school cafeteria. Protein keeps you running. Pizza Hut proudly sponsored here. This is being marketed to our children, and as a mother, this horrifies me. And it happened to us too, way back when, but it's gotten louder. I think the dairy industry is the most brilliant marketing campaign of all time. I really do. It's so insidious and pervasive and bold, as I spoke about before, but let's talk about bone health. So basically we think if you eat calcium or drink calcium, you will have healthy bones, right? Isn't that what we're taught? You need your calcium. Well, bones are much more complex than that. There are so many other variables that go into ideal bone health. And in my TED Talk, I talked about this because I found this out and was really mesmerized by this idea. We think of you're born and you have bones, and then they start to dissolve at a certain point, like age 25 or 30. But no, the bones are alive tissue, and minerals come out and minerals go in, and it's constantly fluctuating. And I find that fascinating because it's very happy. It's a good, positive, empowering idea that we do have control. We can change the mineralization of our bones at our entire lifespan. How do we do that? Well, multi-variable reasons. So one is there's a lot of different nutrients involved, not just calcium, and exercise. The best thing you can do for your bone health is exercise. If you think about it, you guys know about muscle tissue. You build up muscle, you break down your muscles, you're working, you break down in microfiber tears, these tiny little tears in the tissue, it grows back thicker and stronger. If any of you have ever broken a bone, it grows back thicker and stronger. Same concept. Beat up your bones a little bit every day, let them grow back, let them continue to stay strong. The goal is to just not reduce bone density at a certain point, right? The goal is to maintain or grow, but you could do it really most effectively with resistance exercise. Now, after the exercise, you need to consider your nutrition. You need calcium, but you could take in calcium till the cows go home, and hopefully they'll go home sometime soon. It won't absorb. It doesn't mean that it's going to absorb just because you're taking it in. There's other factors that will help modify or moderate whether it's absorbed or not. One of which is vitamin D, like making sure you have adequate levels of vitamin D in your blood to absorb the calcium. Other nutrients that are involved in bone health: phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, sodium, vitamin D, vitamin K, vitamin B12, and protein. So it's not as simple as calcium in equals bone strength. We do need calcium. It's the most abundant mineral in the body, and 99% of which is in your bones and teeth. And then there's 1% floating around in your blood to help with muscle contraction and your heart function and all of that. But there are plant sources of calcium. And actually, fun fact, kale is better absorbed than dairy milk. People don't talk about that when you're learning nutrition. But there are wonderful sources of calcium, and you do have to pay attention to it because you want to make sure you're getting, about 1,000 milligrams a day for an average adult. So you can get it from fortified plant milks. You can get it from a fortified juice if you're doing juice. Most people don't do juice. I don't love juice, but there's other sources: almonds, almond butter, sesames, tahini. I love tahini and hummus. So hummus should be a food group. What else? Tofu has it. Leafy greens have it. There's a lot of different foods. So here's a different way to look at it. 150 milligrams per serving of, and these are different ways you could put throughout your day, like a half a cup of fortified milk, 2 cups of cooked broccoli, a cup of cooked greens, 2 oranges have them, dried figs, almond butter, tahini, calcium set tofu, which most tofu is calcium set. Another way to look at it is 1 cup of cow milk has this much, 96 milligrams of absorbable calcium, and so does a half a cup of Chinese cabbage, 1.5 cups of kale, or less if you cook it, 5.4 ounces of tofu, 2 cups of white beans, 2.25 cups of broccoli, 1.5 cups of calcium-fortified plant milk. So you can get it, you just have to kind of, space it out and put it in throughout your day. And this is just to show you the things that inhibit absorption and things that enhance absorption. And there are a lot more issues besides just getting enough calcium that comes into play. So I do recommend, because of the oxalate issue, a lot of people come to me, I eat leafy greens, I eat spinach every day. I would recommend the low oxalate greens, at least to preferentiate the low oxalate greens, because that calcium is going to be better absorbed. So some low oxalate greens include all of the lettuces, cabbage, kale, also should be a food group, arugula, broccoli, pea greens, watercress, and I would just kind of minimize the delicious Swiss chard, rainbow chard, beet greens, spinach. Those are just higher in oxalates. So it's not an issue for most people, but just mix up your greens. And that's with everything, just variety. And I do like to differentiate those. Now, pardon this image real quickly, but what about dairy? Okay, that's it. That was mastitis. I don't know. I keep it in because it's a lot of people that are still consuming dairy don't know about that. Why not dairy? Yes, dairy does have calcium. You can't argue that dairy has calcium. It does have calcium, and it is a source of calcium. But there's a lot of things it has in it, too. It's like a chemical cocktail that you don't want to put into your body, like the IGF-1, the growth hormones that are found naturally occurring in dairy products. So IGF-1 is a hormone that has been shown to promote the growth of cancer, and it's found in the dairy and the meat products, especially in the dairy products. But also, when you put it in your body up-regulates its own production of IGF-1. So you have higher doses of IGF-1 in your blood. And there's a population with something called Laron syndrome that's been studied, that this population, they have low growth, they're smaller people, but they don't have cancer. And it's because they can't, I think they can't absorb IGF-1 or they don't make IGF-1, one or the other. So IGF-1 is an issue in terms of growth and cancer. Once you're full grown, you don't want to grow anymore. It contains other steroids and hormones, and if it says no added hormones on the label, that's because they're still naturally occurring. When you make breast milk, you have hormones. Animals make hormones. We are hormonal beings. Has the high saturated fat, the dietary cholesterol, the sodium. It inhibits iron absorption. I have a lot of people that come to me and say, I'm plant-based and I'm iron deficient. Well, vegans and non-vegans have the same incidence of iron deficiency anemia. And dairy seems to be a kicker. It seems to put people into the iron deficient possibility even more. There's also a link. There is some research showing that early consumption of dairy promotes type 1 diabetes, and that's because of the molecule, the protein getting absorbed into the bloodstream. It's a big molecule, and if it gets absorbed into the bloodstream too early, it mimics the molecule that looks like the thing responsible for type 1 diabetes. And this is just gross for me, the white blood cell factor, that there's literally pus in the milk, and the mastitis. I have 2 kids. So I breastfed for a year twice with each of them, or 1 year each, and I had mastitis once each, and it was the worst pain I've ever felt in my life. And these animals have mastitis all the time because they're forced to continue producing milk, which is completely unnatural. And because of that, there's pus that gets into their milk. And there's literally regulations. They don't say no pus, they don't get rid of the pus, they just regulate how much pus can be in the milk. So for me, I see milk or dairy and I just see pus. The other factor is casein. The primary protein in dairy is addictive. It has an opioid-like effect in the brain that mimics something like heroin, because if you ever notice, the more you eat, the more you want. And I did a self-placebo controlled study on myself without knowing this many, many years ago. When I was transitioning from vegetarian to vegan, I was like, okay, I'm going to get a vegan cheese. And so I bought, this was before they were really saying the word vegan, so I bought a cheese, it was soy cheese. I'm like, yes, I'm doing it. And I remember every day I would put like one more slice in there because it was so good. Just one more slice. I'm like, wow, this is so good. I'm eating way too much of it. And I finally decided to look at the label. This was before I was a dietitian, of course, because now all I do is look at labels. And there was casein in it. So I was like, oh my gosh, it's true. It is addictive. Any of you that know people that love their cheese will tell you the same thing. But there's studies on it, and Dr. Neil Barnard talks about that. He has a new book coming out about this, too, about dairy. And there's antibiotics, again, and other veterinary medication residues that have been found in dairy products. Finally, what's up with this idea? If you just think about this, anyone, if you go around the world, there are populations that 60% of the population, I've heard recently, upwards of 100% of different cultures. Different cultures have adapted differently to cow milk or milk, actually all dairy. And we become increasingly lactose intolerant because after we wean, we're not supposed to keep drinking milk. And we're the only species that continues to drink milk after weaning, and we're the only species that continues to drink milk from a different species. So if you just think about it from that perspective, if we are not making lactase to digest lactose, isn't that our body telling us something? But wait a minute, you say, because what I'm taught and what I get emails about all the time from my Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics and all of their related relationships are, well, no, you could take lactase, do everything you can. They teach you how do you get that milk in their bodies. You have to get that milk in their bodies. Try this enzyme. Try this milk that doesn't have lactase. I mean, there's like everything you can do. If it's just psychosomatic, they just think that they can't absorb dairy. I can't tell you the strategies that have been employed that people are trying to get you to get that dairy. But if your body's saying something and really rejecting it, why would you do it? I can't tell you. It is the first thing I recommend people give up. And I've seen people with asthma, lifelong asthma, eczema, allergies, myself included. I was famous for having tissues in my pockets, under my pillow, everywhere. So much so that I live in LA, so I was at Whole Foods one day and I got caught by the media wanting to talk about the new freeways, and they interviewed me, and I was like, oh, okay, fine. So I got on the interview, I left, and I went to the bathroom afterwards, and I saw that my tissue was right here. And nobody in the front of the camera told me that I was on the live news with a tissue on my sleeve. So that's my embarrassing story. But point was, I had chronic sinus issues my entire life, and nothing helped. I remember falling asleep in high school because I was taking Benadryl so I could breathe. And this, when I gave up dairy, went away. And I see this with all my clients all the time, just so many inflammatory conditions that are really not responsive to other things. They're not even diagnosable, or they are, and people don't know what to do with them. It really helps. Digestion. For people that are maybe not even lactose intolerant, it's very hard to digest. So there's, I don't know, 1,000,001 reasons to avoid dairy. Well, again, limited data on long-term outcomes on vegan diets without the dairy or with calcium intakes. Some studies, like what Dr. Davis was talking about last night, like EPIC Oxford, where people were eating a lot of processed foods, they weren't getting enough of the calcium, but usually it seems like we can do okay. We may not do better. We just have to make sure we're getting those foods that are high in calcium, and we're making sure our vitamin D levels are good. And so we really just don't know. The evidence is really back and forth. So what do we do about that? Make sure you are doing regular weight-bearing exercise. Every day, do something. Move, weights, walk, everything. Use your muscles, use your body, use it or lose it, I used to say as a personal trainer. Make sure your vitamin D levels are adequate. And so I recommend people just kind of get a blood test and find that out. I know we talked about that last night as well. And make sure that you're including those foods in your diet. And the final myth is plant-based diets are restrictive. Well, what do you eat? Do you just eat salad? And honestly, for me, I discovered food when I stopped putting meat at the center of the plate. You know, as the personal trainer diet was 18 egg whites a day, chicken and veggies. It was all like protein and veggies, protein and veggies. And it wasn't until I took that out of the equation where I discovered things like Ethiopian food and, you know, and Thai food and just really exciting variations and making the, you know, eating bowls and eating, there's just so many amazing things that you can do with food that you're kind of forced into learning. And I always say it's like rethinking the plate or the bowl. And it is a whole completely different way of thinking as we compared to what we were raised eating. I love this cartoon. What people think vegans eat? Granola, tofu, grass, and who knows what else. But really, there's so many things. Veggie burgers, I have a list of foods. But I mean, there's even all these wonderful different cultural, like if you look at any traditional diet around the world, they were plant-based diets. And you know, everywhere around the world is kind of transforming now, but everywhere around the world, people ate staple grains and legumes and vegetables and local and natural foods that came out of the ground. And that is what people have thrived on since the beginning of time until the last, really, it hasn't even been 100 years that we've been processing food the way we are now. It's pretty amazing. And you could see the health change in healthcare and chronic disease as you see us getting more and more industrialized. But there's Chinese food, Indian food, that's my favorite, Italian, Ethiopian, Japanese, Greek, Israeli, Thai. There's so many delicious cuisines, and you get to play with that when you're experimenting with vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices in all sorts of different ways. So just for some ideas, you could have oatmeal. That's what I had for breakfast this morning. You could put some fruit on it. You could put some nuts and seeds on it. You could have a green smoothie. You could have a huge fruit salad or just a piece of fruit if you just want simple. And then you could have a tofu egg scramble if you have time to make it. Those are one of my favorite breakfasts. You could do pancakes. You could do pancakes with like a banana and oat flour. And I mean, really, it's so simple to make a pancake. You could do a chickpea flour pancake. Those are really delicious too. And also the other thing, like I was talking about this last night, I don't like sweet anymore. I can't eat sweet, and I used to be like the chocolate chip cookie guru. Like I love chocolate chip cookies. Me and my sister would go through the batter before we'd even cook it. But I don't want that stuff anymore, and even fruit has gotten too sweet for me. So I will often, if you told me this 10 years ago, I think you were, no way. I like salad for breakfast, or vegetables for breakfast, or savory for breakfast. And this only just recently happened in the last 10 years. But it happens, and I see it with other people too. So those are just some ideas for breakfast. Oh, and the other magic about breakfast is you don't have to have, it's not the most important meal of the day. Every meal is important, and you only eat when you're hungry. Don't eat because someone told you you're supposed to eat at a certain time. That's throwing that in there about mindfulness and listening to your body. Some lunch ideas, a roasted veggie sandwich or a grilled veggie sandwich. I love bowls. So what I started doing, okay, I don't take good pictures. I take really kind of awful pictures. But so I love these bloggers out there. I mean, there are thousands and thousands of amazing recipes on the web, in the web world, in the cookbooks. But so what I started doing is I started posting these recipe roundups, oil-free vegan recipe roundups, and I categorize them. So I have like 30 bountiful breakfasts, 27 tantalizing bowls, 40 sugar-free, oil-free desserts, and I've categorized them, and it's been really fun. I have about 10 of them on my website. I use the bloggers that have these beautiful pictures, so we work synergistically together to share the amazing variety of these delicious foods that you can enjoy. A bean burrito, spring rolls with peanut sauce. You could do a shock and awe salad where you take everything you like. I like a hot and cold salad where you have raw vegetables and you add some cooked broccoli in there, or lots of beans. Get your beans. I recommend 1.5 cups a day of lentils and beans to get all of your healthy nutrients and all that fiber. You could do Japanese style, so you can go and get avocado rolls or vegetable rolls, and you could have some miso soup. Oh, you have to ask if it has fish in it. But you could do sunomono salad. I mean, there's all sorts of different things you could do pretty much anywhere. You could do a nice soup or chili or stew. I've got a roundup on that. If you want any of my roundups, I'm happy. They're all free on my website, and I want everyone to see how easy and delicious it can be. I even have one, it's 50 recipes with 5 ingredients or less. 50, and they're good recipes. I mean, it's that easy. You don't have to be a chef. People always say, call me a chef, and they tell me to do food demos and call me. I act like a chef sometimes, but I'm not a chef. Like I don't know how to magically create things. But you get creative in the kitchen, and it's very simple. And I'm a busy working mom, so I keep it really simple. And there's still a lot of deliciousness. And I feel like I'm a foodie anyway. You can eat all sorts of things. Mexican food is one of my favorites too. So my kids are picky, my husband's picky, so I'll make like oil-free refried beans with salsa and frozen roasted corn. Heat it up, and then for me, I'll put it on my corn tortilla and a big salad, and my kids like it in a burrito, and my husband, or a taco, and my husband will do it in a burrito, so you could do it all different ways, and it's really quick and easy. Curries are delicious. You can do all sorts of different types of curries, Indian curries, red curries, green curries, yellow curries, lentil chili. I love bean chili. There's a million ways to make a good, mean chili, and you make a big vat of that, and that lasts all week. Potatoes, jacket potatoes, those are fun too. You could play with potatoes, use them as the base, and then put your chili on top, or put a soup on top, or put an oil-free dressing on top, or put a peanut sauce on top, and it's a very easy to-go food, a really delicious food. Grilled veggie pizza, you could take a tortilla and make a pizza out of it, right? You just add your vegetables and cook, what, 2 minutes? It takes 2 minutes. You could you can make your own crust, but now they have great crusts that you could buy at the store that are ready-made that you literally just heat up. So I'll do that when we're rushing around at night for dinner. Jackfruit has become the jack of all trades, the new protein source, right? It's a natural food. It's a fruit, that huge thing that people have turned into delicious, really creative concoctions. So that's what some of those pictures are. Now I'm hungry. That's the problem with my job, is I'm always talking about food. I'm always making myself hungry. Snacks, my favorite snack is hummus. I have one of my blog posts, I think it's 30 hummuses to prove that hummus should be a food group. 30 recipes that prove hummus should be a food group. You could eat it with crudité, you could eat it with pita bread or whole grain bread or tortillas. Guacamole, we do a lot of guacamole in Los Angeles. Trail mix, I always have trail mix at home for my kids, a quick grab-and-go snack. You can make your own Whole Foods bar. It's a lot better to make them, but you could also buy them now. They have some, just read the ingredient list, make sure they're just whole foods. Fresh fruit is the nature's to-go fruit. It was born like that. A green smoothie, the list goes on and on. But ultimately, you just want to find what works for you. How do you get more plants into your diet? How do you make sure you're getting a wide variety and emphasizing the most health-promoting vegetables, fruits, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, herbs, and spices? And I want to end on my favorite recent quote from Dr. Greger again. He said that the best kept secret in medicine is that under the right conditions, the body can heal itself. And we can. And I'm happy to answer any questions. No questions. I answered all of your questions. Yes. Oh, Mike. He's coming with the mic.
You're awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was incredible. You talked about glucose for the brain. What about fruits and fructose for the brain?
Good question. Well, fructose, that's a good question. I don't know. I know that it needs glucose, so that's a good question. But fructose, when you're eating it in fruit, also turns into glucose. And so you're going to absorb the glucose.
And also with oil pulling with coconut oil?
Oh, what?
Oil pulling?
I have not seen research on oil pulling. I've heard amazing anecdotal stories about how it helps people. I'm not opposed to it if you're not swallowing it, but I think some of it probably gets swallowed. So I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
We had a discussion between some of the doctors last night, and it was a question of, if I'm trying to transition and I'm looking for plant-based meals, meaning it's like 27 plant-based, it's in powdered form, and then there was a statement that that's not desirable. So, I mean, I buy the packet in this 2016, and they come up with, 27 varieties of plant-based proteins, and it's mixed in, and I'm saying take that out of my diet because it's...
Right. So I actually was one of the people that I don't recommend protein powders. I work with these big athletes that get big without protein, and if they don't need protein powders, I don't think anyone needs protein powders. We get enough protein, and like I said, just because something is good doesn't mean more is better. And that's the equivalent of how what oil is to fat, what sugar is to carbohydrate, is what protein powder is to protein. It's a concentrated source where you're taking out much of the other nutrients. So I don't think anyone really needs protein. I would say the exception is I work with people that are either really, really sick and can't eat, have major digestive issues, and they just can't get enough calories in at that point because they're not able to chew and they're not able to get a lot of things in. At that point, I would recommend possibly a protein powder. But I don't think in the general population people need to consume protein powders.
For years, trying to say taking the meat out, and then to quickly say that gram-wise, I was told clearly that we're supposed to have like 28 grams, 30 grams of protein, like in a meal.
Well, oh no. But see, that depends on your weight, right? Because they go by grams per kilogram per day. So whatever your weight is, divided by 2.2 to get your kilograms, and then multiply by 0.8. Now, if you're a big athlete and you're doing a lot of exercise and you can multiply times 1.0 or 1.2, you could go up accordingly. But even that, you will get that by eating more calories to fulfill your caloric needs for that activity. So when you eat more, you're eating more protein, and that's why I like the grams per kilogram per day. But overall, you really only need about 10 to max 15% of your calories coming from protein. After that, it becomes taxing on the body. There's no one that really, you don't need as much as we think we do.
Regarding B12, I've always been told that methylcobalamin, however you say it,
Methylcobalamin.
yeah, is better than the kind that you had on
Cyanocobalamin.
the slide. Can you explain the difference?
I'm so glad you asked that, and honestly, I will send you a link on this because the only reason I'm saying cyano now, I've read that too, is because that's what those calculations were based upon. And cyano was more accessible and everywhere you go, health food stores and everywhere. And I think that might be where, because these original recommendations came from Jack Norris from Vegan Health.org, and I'll send you, he describes it really why he chose cyano, and I think it's still debatable, but I don't have the calculation for that because no one has actually calculated that out in the way that he has. And it's a very good question, and there are other forms of cobalamin as well. So even what I do, I don't trust the supplement industry. Like I said last night, you will get a supplement, and if they randomly blindly take it to a lab and test what is actually in there and compare it to what it says on the label, I don't think it's ever been exactly what's on the label. There are fillers, the dosing is different. So I don't trust that because I really don't have a company that I have full faith in, and no one's regulating it. Not that that necessarily helps, but because of that, I just buy different ones. Every time I buy a new bottle of B12, it's methyl, then it's cyano, and then it's this. So I guess the biggest message is not to worry so much about that. Just make sure you're getting a B12 supplement. That's a very good question, and it requires further research. But I'll send you the information that I have on it and why I'm saying cyano, but I don't think methyl is bad in any way. I think it's just the way they titrated it and calculated it per age group.
I have two quick questions. Okay. One, for example, the coconut oil. You may have said this, but how much would be permissible? For example, I swim. So in the morning, I oil my body, and when I get out of the ocean, I'll oil it again. Well, it's a lot of coconut oil. So I was just curious, and it does absorb.
I know, that's what I wonder when I'm putting on my skin, how much absorbs, and I don't know how much absorbs. I don't know if that's ever been tested. That would be a good study. That's a very good question. I don't know. I mean, if you're not taking it in, I would assume it's less, but the skin is the largest organ. Absolutely. And I know how much I absorb, it just goes right in. Your body soaks it up. That's a very good question. I hope someone studies that someday. Maybe mix it up. Try jojoba oil once in a while, or I don't know, there's other great oils that work. I know. The
other question is, I caregive for my mother, who's 93 years old, and do you have some basic, I mean, she's somewhat resistant.
Oh, yeah.
But where would the dairy, of course, she's really hooked to dairy. I think, would that be the first place to start?
Yeah, okay, here's what after 22 years doing this, I've concluded officially that I say it like this, you can lead a human to healthy, but you can't make them eat. And I have people that send me their children, their parents, their husbands or wives or significant others, and please help them. They are very sick, or please help them. And I want my own parents, my own father. He's overweight. Sorry, Dad, if you're listening. I don't think he's listening. It's early in LA. He is. He's overweight. He's been on blood pressure medicine as long as I can remember. And he has these things of cheese in his fridge that he goes to town on every day. Since my whole life, I remember him coming home, first thing he does is take out some cheese. And no matter what I do say, he's seen me lectures, read my books, so he says, and you have to want it from within. You have to want it. My son is fighting me to the T about going to parties and having pizza and stuff like that. And I can't make, even my own child, like you can't make someone do that. It's not possible. It has to come from within. You can inspire. You can have, if you have some control over what's in the kitchen, you can just make sure that's the stuff that's in the kitchen. You can show them research. I read my kids' research. They're little, but I'm trying every avenue. You can do everything you can proactively, but you can't force the issue. If you want to have one issue to start with, because to pick your battles, I would choose dairy, because it's so addictive and it's the one thing that once you get rid of, yeah. I had this one experience personally where it took me all that time to get off the cheese, and I was finally off of it for years and years, and I went to Whole Foods and they had these little tofu rolls samples, and I had one, I was like, oh, this is really good, and then I took one from the other side thinking it was the same thing, and it felt like the slimiest, nastiest thing I had to spit it out, and it was cheese. And you don't realize how your palate adapts to that and loves that fatty, greasy thing. So it's getting off of it. It's like a drug. And Neil Barner's book that's coming out is probably going to be really interesting. Maybe she would read that. But you have to be open to listening, and you have to be open to change. No matter what I do, I used to beat my head against the wall with my clients, with my family, and it's sad because you know what you want them to do. I know my kids, I want them to be, and you could only do what you can do, and you inspire.
Hi, I'm looking forward to the day that I lose my taste for sugar. When's that going to happen?
It happens. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay. So, sugar addict, former recovered sugar addict. I never even tried to. I didn't realize it was a problem. It wasn't even an issue for me. I just ate it all the time, and I ice cream by the bowls, right? And what happens now, and I've seen this now with clients a lot for years, that get rid of the artificial sweeteners. I have a little program. Get rid of the artificial sweeteners, because that is, like I said last night, up to hundreds or thousands of times sweeter than table sugar, so that perpetuates the cravings for sweet at a high threshold, so that nothing tastes sweet after you have an artificial sweetened anything. So those Diet Cokes, they're awful. And there's all sorts of other reasons to avoid those things. But anything with sugar. So you have to decide you want to do this. And if you decide you want to do this is what I recommend. This is what I do with my clients. We'll do a 3-week set 3 weeks, because if you think never, it's impossible, right? You don't want to think, I can never have a cookie again, or whatever your drug of choice is. I can never have that again. You can't think that way. Give yourself a timeline, and 3 weeks is usually enough to start changing your taste buds. I've heard recently, the evidence keeps growing, that it's 12 or 18 months now to change a habit. So it's really a taste bud thing. So give yourself 3 weeks. Now, during these 3 weeks, set it aside, not during the holidays, so do it sooner rather than during the holidays. Don't do it during the holidays or birthday. Set aside 3 special weeks. Love yourself up that week. Set yourself up with all sorts of non-food treats. Schedule a girls' night out. Schedule a movie. Schedule hot baths every night. Schedule, get a magazine that you've always wanted to read, but you feel like you're wasting your time, or a really juicy novel that you feel like, I shouldn't really read this, I should read my academics. Stuff that you really want, but you've been limiting. And save that for these 3 weeks, especially the first few days, because it gets progressively easier. And then also have an arsenal of sugar-free desserts. So you could go to my blog, 40 sugar-free, oil-free desserts, and you can make desserts that don't have sugar and don't have any refined or really sweet foods. I only use like date paste or date syrup. Sometimes I use maple syrup. But you have those desserts ready to go, and you start titrating yourself. This all happened. This is how it happened to me and my clients too. So if any of you have seen The Chef and the Dietitian, I've been doing recipes with Chef AJ since 2010, and she's a pastry chef. So she makes these incredible desserts. And when I first met her, I was like, oh, I found the Mecca, my dessert, my drug, what's it called, dealer, because she would bring me on my birthday these incredible cakes. And I remember I would be like in the freezer, like eating that cake because it was so good after everyone left, because it was so good, all made with dates. Really good. progressively that started to get too sweet. So much so then I was like, ooh, and then I would have like a sweet potato. I was like, oh, I never realized how good sweet potatoes are. Where did I get these sweet potatoes? But then I realized that sweet potatoes, no matter where I was getting them, were sweet. And then I started realizing that fruit got really sweet. And then I couldn't eat AJ's desserts anymore, nor can AJ. She admits that too. And then all of a sudden, it just starts happening. That takes longer. But if you set aside like a detox, like a sugar detox, I don't love the word detox, but really where you are going to love yourself out of that sugar craving, and then you give yourself those checked desserts ready to go. Get rid of all the other stuff from your house, because otherwise it's going to call your name no matter how much willpower you have, and make just set that side of time, and it gets better from there. It really does.
I'm doing that.
Okay, good. You go, girl.
My quick question is about oxalates. So are those like the cruciferous and the deep leafy greens? Because I think, as long as you eat your deep leafy greens, that's your insurance policy.
Totally.
But do they impede your digestion for your whole meal? And does that include the cruciferous vegetables?
Okay.
What's the problem with oxalates?
Good question. And yeah, I have actually a beautiful meme that Simple Reminders made for me saying, let thy leafy greens be thy medicine and thy medicine be thy leafy greens, because they are so nutrient dense and phenomenal. However, oxalates are just a compound found in certain leafy greens and other foods too, chocolate, and there's a list of them. And it kind of inhibits slightly the absorption of calcium and iron, some of the minerals. It just kind of blocks the absorption of the minerals. So there's nothing wrong with eating some spinach. It's not a bad food or Swiss chard or any of that. But I just say mix it up. And the ones that are low oxalate, like I listed before, include kale, cabbage, all the different colors of cabbage, broccoli, watercress, all of the different lettuces, so arugula, any kind of lettuce, mustard greens, those are lower in oxalates, and you're just going to have better absorption, just to maximize your absorption opportunities. That's all. It's not a major issue, especially if you don't have oxalate stones, which most people don't.
Cruciferous vegetables, are those high in?
No, those you're thinking probably of the goitrogens involved in cruciferous, and those are, cruciferous vegetables are one of the most healthful foods ever, because they have really wonderfully reported health benefits just to cruciferous themselves. But just make sure you're getting enough iodine, and make sure you have a selenium source in your diet, and then you're gonna not have to worry about your thyroid from that stuff. Sure. Well, thank you all very much. If that's it, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Sorry, I have one.
Oh, one more question.
Yeah.
Honey? Oh, okay, well, honey, that's a good question. I don't recommend honey because it's an animal product, but when you compare it to something like agave, it would be healthier because agave has more fructose. It looks like high fructose corn syrup in the body. Honey would not be as bad because it has the natural pollination from the local from the local bees and all that. So it's not a bad food. It's not a vegan food either. But if you're limiting sugars and stuff, I would recommend limiting that. I would recommend focusing on the whole food sources, like the date paste, date syrups. But in the spectrum of things, if you compare it to table sugar, it's night and day. It's very different. Well, not night and day. It has a similar effect on the blood sugar, but not as sharp a spike. Yeah. Thank you.